evening, sir. My name is Vinayak, and I am from first year from mechanical branch. I, along with Somajita and all of my first year executive members, welcome to you to our variety podcast that is conducted by
Thank you.
the Mechanical Engineering Society of NIT Silchar. Yes, sir. Variety podcast is an initiative to interview and have an interactive session with highly respected people who have worked very hard and now are very successful, so that we can gain some of the motivation and learn some things from you. So, sir, shall we begin with our conversation?
Sure, please. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, sir, here comes our first question that as you are currently the head of Mobility Innovation Hub at Tata Motors, so definitely you have come a long way. So, sir, I would be really obliged if you could tell us about your journey and the position you are at today.
Thank you. Thanks, Vinayak. So, once it'll take a couple of minutes, but I'll explain to you my career path. And once I passed out of REC, as it was then called, I actually had an option of which direction I wanted to follow. And unlike some of the mechanical engineers, I was sure of one thing that I do not want to go into manufacturing. I didn't want to go into shop floors activity or anything to do with that part of the plant or anything. So which left an option which was, and I was keen on looking at MBA as an option and get into the management side, especially marketing and stuff like that. So I was applying to that, and then coincidentally I come across an opportunity which was to do with looking at design. And I came across this course which was available out of IIT Bombay called Industrial Design Center, and the program was called Master of Design. And I did not know anything about it. In those days, you can imagine there was no internet. The magazines were not very accessible in Silchar. I don't know now. It must be. Of course, internet has made the whole thing completely different. But for us to get information means you had to physically go to that location and find out what it is about. So I did. I was based that time out of Pune because my father was from a defense background and he was posted here. So I actually made a trip to Bombay, went to IIT, walked up to the IDC, Industrial Design Center, to find out more about this. And I realized that it has to do with not so much engineering design, but more to do with the aesthetics and the styling element of design, which kind of cater to area which I kind of liked because I had an aptitude for softer elements also, which are not necessarily only technical and logical. So I did apply for it. I got through, and that I put in 2 years and came out as a industrial designer. And so this was my first part where I had to take a major decision of what do I want to do to build on my basic qualification of being a mechanical engineer. Having done that, the next step was okay, which industry would I want to serve in? And at that time there were various industries of consumer products were there, but industrial design per se was not being used very aggressively in India at that time. While IDC had been in existence for nearly, I think, at that time about 18 years, but the output was just about 15 people per year. That was the batch size for industrial designers. And and they were typically being absorbed by people like L&T, Godrej, Godrej for the furniture division, L&T for the power circuit breaker division, and stuff like that. So for me, the option was which way do I want to go, and again the decision was I want to go into consumer product side, and plastics was an area which I was very keen on because it afforded a kind of it's a material which offers you a lot of flexibility and in terms of shapes, form factors, consumer experience. So I joined a company called Milton Plastics as a designer, and it was a very interesting experience, which you guys may find anecdotal. Is that till then Milton didn't have a design department; they had a drafting department, and every year the owners of the thing, it was a family-owned business, would go to Singapore or Hong Kong for trips and bring back products from there and give it to the draftsman and say, "Isko copy kar do." Copy these out, and then
Yes.
launch that product. And they had about 30. Let me know if I'm going into too much detail or you want me to cut it more shorter and the other questions you will follow up will cover these aspects. Yeah.
Yes,
So
you
is it
can.
okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So my job was basically to say how can Milton was a market leader at that time. In that thermoware product business, they had water bottles and tiffin carriers and children's tiffins as their products. It was a 100 crore company. Again, not very big by standards of other big players, but reasonably sized in that sense. So their job was to create their own IP. Being a market leader, they can't keep copying. So we set up a small design center and started growing that. Uh, to cut a long story short, in about 4 years' time, we brought them to a level where they had their own designs going into the market, not 100%, but at least 50% products were being designed in-house, you know. And like this, I then moved on because I had the level of learning that I wanted at that stage and also my ability to contribute. And I thought it's better to hand it over to the next generation, which was coming in, and move on. At that time, I joined, I was reached approached by a company called Thermax, which is in Pune. They were into area water treatment and waste management and energy systems. So they were setting up a joint venture in consumer products for water treatment, and they wanted, again, a design department to help design a set of purifiers and water softeners and all for domestic application. So I joined there, and the designation for whatever it's worth was called Head of Science and Technology. So I was handling not only the design part but also the technology part of chemical engineering to some extent. Okay. And anyway, fantastic experience, very industrial-minded company, products which came from a very different perspective around water, and that was a great experience for me. So at each stage, what happens is you get exposed to something new and you build your profile. Somewhere you build a profile of being exposed to plastics. Somewhere you and For example, in Milton, we used to do something like 30 products a year. So technologically they were very less complex, but from a consumer perspective, in terms of what shape will attract them, what graphics will attract them, what packaging will attract them, you get a big exposure. You know in Thermax, the learning was more technology oriented, more technology driven. So we had a ozone based purifier. So you had to learn about ozone as a technology, ozone as a purification method. You learned about a master control unit. I mean, earlier that entire in Silchar, we had access to the BBC microcontroller, laptop computers, and we used to do our entire programming learning was Intel 8085 training kits. And suddenly you were being exposed to here working with much more advanced microcontrollers and stuff like that, and you had to give your input to the electronic engineers as to what feature sets you wanted out of that. I mean, I was not expected to code and all that, but at least you had to give input to the right people for the right output. So then again, phenomenal experience. And at that stage, I took a little course correction where went into automotive. So I joined a company called Dilip Chabria Design, DC Design, it was called. They're into vehicle car customization. And they were very strong in individual car customization, but they wanted to build a business around working with corporates, with OEMs, which is companies like Tata Motors, companies like Mahindra, for doing the design, doing the prototyping, doing show cars for them. I don't know how many of you are interested in cars. I mean, just a show of hands, or you can put a thumbs up or whatever if you like, whatever is available here. Okay, anyway, doesn't matter. So that was my first course correction, going from product design to automotive design. And my job was to build that business for DC. So suddenly my role became more business oriented. It was less of design, and I had actually stopped not doing so much of design myself, but more managing a team of designers there, basically, and looking at business development. So my job was basically to go approach company like Tata Motors, approach company like Mahindra, Ashok Leyland, ask them for business, get the business, execute the product, deliver the product, and collect the money. It was from end to end. It was like operating like a business manager end to end. And this business we grew reasonably well. We also looked at international exposure. So for the first time, DC Design took part in the Geneva Motor Show, which is one of the premium motor shows in Europe. And the idea was to showcase our capabilities so that European manufacturers could look at India as a low cost sourcing option for vehicle prototyping, basically. And this was reasonably successful because we got a project from a company called Aston Martin. Now they're owned by a Chinese manufacturer. That time they were owned by Ford. So we got the project to do a prototype for the next small Aston Martin, which was supposed to be launched in under their brand name. And phenomenal experience working with international designers for the first time, going to UK, getting the brief, getting inputs, their designers coming to India, working out of a studio in Bombay. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal. The kind of learning we got from that and the kind of exposure. And incidentally, that car was also supposed to become the next James Bond car. because I don't know again how many of you follow James Bond. James Bond has typically been using Aston Martins till then, but for the last three movies before that, they had shifted to BMW as a James Bond car. And with this Aston Martin, they were coming back to Ford. So for us, for Ford, it was a very big opportunity to showcase their capability against BMW. So it got a lot of publicity at that time. And it also got informed that DC Design in India had built that prototype, basically. So great experience. And with that, at some point, again, like I said, I reached a kind of a limit of what I could grow in that company. And my target was to approach the owner, Mr. Chabria, at that time saying, why don't you hive this off as a separate business and let me run it? And you tell me what kind of profitability you want, and I can contribute that. But I would like to run it as a separate business that I manage. He was okay with that, but his board did not agree, and because of that, he had to. I moved out. Basically, we did not see eye to eye. So I'm so very sorry. I just need to take this one call. Just give me one second, please. Yeah. I'm sorry, I may get disturbed once again, but let me go till then. Yeah. So this was a great, like I said, learning video. I also managed to work at that time because DC was in Bombay and they were setting up a new studio, and this was in Pune because they wanted to expand. And the cost of expansion in Bombay is very high, as you can imagine. The cost of land, the cost of building, whatever. So at that time, we convinced DC to expand into Pune, and we set up a studio in Pune. But for that, I got exposure, a chance to expose myself to raising investments in DC because we wanted to raise a funding round. So I worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers to create the information memorandum, which can be used for pitching to investors. And I met whole lot of investors from private equity to venture capitalists to banks to raise that funding, which was again a great learning. So overall, if you see, the profile is now getting built in a manner which is going from just design to business to looking at funding and how do you raise funds and how do you convince people. It was like a startup in one way. Of course, that time startups were not in a fashionable term at that time. So this was a great experience for me. And at that time, I moved out of DC after that, and I joined for a very short time an Israeli company, which was again back to product. And the reason for this was to take that break while I did have an opportunity to work with automotive companies because literally all the people who were in automotive were known to me, whether it was Tata Motors, Mahindra. But somewhere I didn't want to go from being a supplier to them to asking them for a job because somewhere I thought ethically it did not make sense. It was something which I felt uncomfortable about. So I took a break from automotive industry completely and applied outside the automotive industry, going back into product. So this was an Israeli company looking at setting up a manufacturing base in India for exports, you know, and they wanted a CEO in India to set up that whole operation. And I worked there for 9 months, but one thing I realized in 9 months that it was very boring. While it was a nice label, lot of seniority, good salary, exposure to Israel as a country, which was phenomenal. I'll come to that in a minute. But the content was not into what I wanted to do with life. My whole passion was around creativity, around doing something innovative, doing something out of the box. So within 9 months, I went to the owner of that company, gentleman called Peter Weisberg. He's a Jewish guy, saying, I need to quit. So he said, is it about salary? I mean, I can increase the salary. I said, no, it's not about salary. I just don't enjoy my work, basically. And he was very upset with me because he thought that we had a good equation going and we had a good business model and proposition. But anyway, I unfortunately had to leave and he was not very happy with me. But I wanted to, before I move on, I think if any one of you ever get a chance to work with Israel, it's something you can give your left arm and a leg for it. As a country, as people, I mean, they are one of the most hardworking, most innovative, and most enterprising people. Their work ethics, their approach to any problem is absolutely mind-boggling. You know, I mean, I mean, the level of innovativeness in Israel that you will see, and if you just do a search in number of patents filed by private companies in Israel versus any other European country, Israel is by far the highest, even though it's a very small country. It's 4.5 million people, but the number of IP patents registered by Israel is, I think, if I remember, in the private industry, they're only second after US. And now, of course, China may have gone well ahead. I'm talking to you about 2000 and 7, 8, basically, but phenomenal country, and a great experience, again, from a learning, and nice people, very nice people, very humble, very nice, and not from when you hear about war and all that, that's a different aspect of theirs, but then they're fighting for survival, you know. Anyway, I then joined a company called Renault, and Renault was looking at coming into India and launching some of their products here. And they had a joint venture with Mahindra at that time, and they wanted a design studio to be set up. So my responsibility was set up the design capacity for them in terms of both infrastructure and manpower by recruiting and training people. So I did that, and then I shifted to Chennai for another 2 years because Renault's main production plant was in Chennai, and they were setting up an technology engineering center there, which I shifted into for another 2 years. I also managed to do 1 year of what is called product planning in an automotive company. What product you will launch, what are the features of that product, what the specification of the product, what the engine power should be, who's your target customer, what is the pricing, is all defined by a department called product planning. Basically, it is not done by marketing, it is not done by engineering, it is done by product planning, who does the product conceptualization. So I got a chance to work with Renault in product planning for 2 years, and that again was a great learning because here you are getting exposed to global processes in automotive, because Renault, being a 100-year-old company, had very well defined processes. Yeah. So that was a nice 4 year stint. Unfortunately, I was working out of Chennai and I wanted to come back to Pune because my family was in Pune. They had not shifted to Chennai with me. So I applied to Tata Motors at that time, and Tata Motors was starting to reinvent its entire product portfolio. And these were days when the products like Manza and Indica and Indico were the product that they were which were going down, and Tata's market share was falling literally month on month. And they wanted to refurbish their entire portfolio and bring a new product line, and they wanted to strengthen design. See, typically, where does design sit in an organization is very important, because in most of the companies it sits under engineering, in which case it loses the entire power to contribute. Yeah, but in and Tata Motors was changing that, so they were making design report to the CTO directly, which will empower them to take decisions, which allows interesting designs to be built, basically. So with this change, they asked me to join and set up the whole design facility in Pune and build the team, basically. So when I joined Tata Motors, and there was also my boss who was sitting in US, or sorry, UK, who was the head of design, a gentleman named Pratap Bose. So he was heading design overall. I was heading the Pune studio. So at that point, I joined. There were about 25 people in the studio. By the time I handed over responsibility of the design studio to my colleague, we were at about 120 people. So we expanded capacity, expanded competency, capabilities, and everything. And the Tata product range you can see now, which is there in the market, whether it's a Nexon, Altroz, or Harrier and stuff like that. So these were done as part of this agenda. Yeah. So at that stage, again, as you can understand, I mean, if you look at my thing, I have a 4 year each. In 4 years, I start getting bored with my job, and I start chasing my boss to do something different. So this time I went to my boss and saying, I need to move on. And do you have something interesting for me? Because I don't want to leave Tata Motors. I like Tata as a group. I like the values with which we work, but I don't like the work I'm doing anymore. And plus I can't contribute anymore. It's a two-way thing. One is I have to learn and I have to contribute. And if both things are getting plateaued, I think it's time to move on. So with that intention, I went to my boss, who was an English gentleman called Dr. Leverton. He was a CTO, and he said that we are thinking of setting up a small office in US, in California. Would you like to head that, basically? And my question to him was, what is the responsibility? And his idea was that Tata Motors should start looking at what is the next wave of disruption which is coming from Silicon Valley, which will hit us in the automotive industry. And if we can anticipate that change, we can prepare for it. Because as you can imagine, Silicon Valley is at least 5 to 10 years ahead of the industry in general in terms of innovation, in terms of technology disruptions. So the idea was that we have an antenna there which can capture that signal and be ready for that. So the whole idea of this office was like an antenna, and also to engage with startups whom we can then work with to onboard that learning and that knowledge so that we can then benefit from it, because our own innovation engines, our own R&D centers were not capable of driving that level of change, basically. So with that, I packed my bags and I was in US for about a year and a half, basically. And at that time, there were some learnings which kind of asked me to come back to India. Because again, if I give you an example, I mean, I was having a nice time. I was learning. I was getting exposed to people. I was getting exposed to technology. I had a chance to meet the CEO of the founder of Nvidia, Jensen Huang. I mean, that kind of capability opportunities you only get in a place like Silicon Valley. And the best part is you don't have to go through 10 levels of structure to get permission to meet him. You drop him a mail. If he finds it interesting, he replies to you, "Okay, meet me at 4 o'clock next no, next week," and you are there. It's very informal as a culture, basically. I mean, in India, if you try to approach the CEO or MD of any company, it'll take you 3 months twice to get his email ID, and then he may not respond also. I mean, there it is much more reactive and responsive and informal, basically. But it was a phenomenal, 1.5 year fun. But the challenge was that whatever work I was doing there did not have an opportunity to come back to Tata Motors in India because there was no landing ground. There was no department which will receive that and ensure that the young plant that is nurturing has a chance to survive. Because Tata Motors, with all the processes and systems and all, is still very bureaucratic. We are still very traditional in our operations and our thinking. So unless there's a right function which can nurture that idea and help it grow and be groomed, it will die. You know. So at that time, I told my boss that we need a structure like this, we need a function like this. So his job thing was, okay, come back and set it up. So at that time, I came back to India and we set up this function called mobility services in corporate strategy. So I moved out of the technology role for the vertical for the first time and went into strategy function called mobility services. And the mandate was that what can Tata Motors do as part of the new business evolution, where services is becoming business. From product as a service or services as a business, shared mobility, electrification. So all those were the mandates that we were asked to drive, which has been about 2 years or 3 years now. Again, so I'm now moving into a space where I'm working with electric vehicles. I'm working with battery technologies, but not from production. And there are many people to look after that. It's more around innovation. So, for example, last August we launched EV subscription, where you don't have to buy a Nexon EV. You can take it on a monthly rental, and all that everything is taken care of by the company. And as a consumer, you just drive and pay every month. It's like renting a house, you know. And when you don't want it, you return it to the company and you stop your payments. So we launched it for the first time in EVs in India. Again, fantastic learning, working with people, working with this. So that's the journey. I'm sorry, very long, but it had to cover 26 years or whatever, from 88 to 2021. Any
Yes,
questions or thoughts?
that was really inspiring journey, sir. So I had another question in my mind that we see that you had a long journey for the designing purpose. When we talk about designing, we generally have the thought that it's just like sitting on the computers and making some drawings and artworks. But I see it seems so that industrial design is something different. So can you please some light on this?
Yeah. So I think there are different aspects of design, and design is also a very abused word or much used word. So design covers everything from engineering design, which can be design of a gear, which you guys would be learning, I'm sure. Like design of fluid or system level, which can be fluid systems. How will a fluid mechanics system work, for example? They can be design of electronics board, where a PCB has to be designed. They can be, so everything is designed in one end, and this is all technical design, where a lot of work will be done on computers naturally, because there are softwares in computers which allow you to cut short your effort, because there are some people who have made it into a standard software which can be used to quickly do work which you would otherwise do manually. You know, industrial design is more about looking at the elements which cater to the senses of people. When people see the product, do they like the product? When they like the product means, what is its shape, color, texture, graphics, which are all the softer elements of it. It is to do with, if you are designing a perfume bottle, how will it be used? So the ergonomics comes into it very strongly. If you're designing a steering wheel, how easy it is to grip. Do you get tired gripping it? How far is the horn button from your finger? Do you reach it or not? So ergonomics comes into it in a big manner. So it's not only to do with just the aesthetics but also functionality. how easy it is for the person to use, how difficult can you make it for him to abuse it. So for example, can a person not use the product wrong? Because if they use it wrong, there can be an accident. Imagine you pressing a button which was meant for alarm but was colored green by somebody. Now instead of raising an alarm, to be pressed in the case of emergency, you will think it's green, let me activate this machine, and you press the wrong button and you may have a fire there. So those elements become very important, which are to do with human factors, human elements, with about likes and dislikes, about choices that people make, about tastes. So this is one aspect of industrial design. Second, very important of as per industrial design is how do people's taste change? Because if I take a car, now I'm designing a car which development time is about 3 years. From the time I start work, 3 to 5 years, depending on how many parts are you changing. Now imagine I have to design a car for a customer which will be in the market 5 years from today. That means I have to anticipate what will a customer be liking 3 5 years from today. So if I ask you what shirt will you wear tomorrow morning, I'm sure you have not thought of that as yet. Because you will go to your cupboard, you'll say outside there's a lot of sunshine, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling bright, there's no exam, there's no test, let me enjoy. You'll pick up a nice colorful shirt with nice patterns, maybe. The day you're feeling gloomy, you're feeling down, there's a pressure test, you'll take a black t-shirt and wear it. So now I'm asking you to anticipate as a designer, what will a customer like after 3 years? So designers have to extrapolate consumer trends, in terms of behaviors, patterns, lifestyles. How will they spend time? How will they spend leisure time? How will they spend money? Will they spend with family? Will they spend alone? Will they be reading books? Will they be on Wikipedias? Whatever. So you have to anticipate that and then design for that usage. you know so this becomes a very challenging aspect for a designer, and the designer is not doing it alone. There are market research agencies which are helping him and all that, but finally designer has to take a decision. you know and if you look at even cars, the way a car looked, say an ambassador, it had very big radius. It was like a bubble gum, a roundy kind of stuff and all that. Look at the shape of cars today. They are much more sharper, much more defined. They are still, there are radius, but they are much more liberal. Now that is the evolution of form factor, how shapes have changed. But if you show somebody an ambassador today, you don't have to tell that person which year it was. They will say this is an old car. They don't have to be told, okay, this is ambassador in 1970. By shape itself they can say this is an old shape. But you show somebody the shape of a new i20 or a new Nexon, there's no way they will say this is a 10-year-old car, because shape itself connotes modernity, and contemporariness and trendiness. So design is all about all of this. And the last part of a design is, which most people actually confuse, that, oh, I like drawing, so I'll become a designer. No, I'm sorry. If you like drawing, you should become a draftsman, because design is not about drawing. Drawing is only a language by which you speak. As a designer, what's in your head, you have to show on paper. You throw it through sketching, you throw it to a digital model, show it through a CAD model. That is only a way of externalizing your own feelings or your own thought process. Yeah. I mean, just because you can speak English, English doesn't become your identity unless you're an English teacher, you know. But English is a way of you expressing your emotion, or language is a way of expressing your emotion. Drawing is a language of designers, So just because you're a good person at sketching or drawing doesn't mean you're a good designer. For designer, you have to be empathetic. That's a word you will come across a lot. How do I anticipate the need of a consumer, extrapolate it, and then build on that, basically.
Thank you, sir.
Nice listening to you. So moving forward, we will go to our next question. So, as we all know, presently there has been an exponential increase in the IT sector, and most students opt for these jobs right after their college. We can also see that there has been chances that people like the engineering students tend to go for the CSE branch. So, would you like to comment about the future scope of mechanical engineers and the core engineering sector as a whole?
I think you're a first year guy, so I should not maybe say some of the things that I am saying, but let me go ahead. See, I can guarantee you within 2 years of passing out, you will not even remember half the books that you're reading now. You will not even remember 90% of the content that you are now requiring to be learned to pass an exam. So it's what you're learning is not so much the content, but what you're learning is the fundamentals of design. You're learning the fundamentals of problem solving. You're learning the fundamentals of a step by step logical approach to problem solving. I mean, that at an inherent level you are doing. That's not being taught to you in any chapter. There's no book that you're being taught, but that's the approach that you take when you design a mechanical engineering system or a fluid mechanics system or whatever you do, basically. So somewhere I think it's also maybe an education gap that is there, that our curriculum is not updated with what the need of the industry is. So when an IT guy comes and hires you, he's not hiring you for your information on fluid mechanics, or your strength of material or your thermodynamics. They are hiring you for your way you think, the way you have been trained to approach a problem, so that when they take you into an IT system and they train you, your learning for that industry will start when you join their company, because you have not learned about IT systems in your mechanical engineering, but what you have learned is your basic structural thing of how to approach a problem, how to have a disciplined approach, how to look at parameters which impact the problem, how to look at boundary conditions, how to look at edge cases. So these are the fundamental things that you are learning here, which will become useful to you, which you won't forget, but you will forget. But yes, what it does teach you, that someone comes and challenges you saying tomorrow, okay, help me design this, you know which book to open at least, or what keywords to search on Google to get answers for that. So that's the learning that you do. So please don't get disappointed or dissuaded. Please do all the learning you are, because that's a must, because you have to pass your exam, but you will never get hired otherwise. Yeah. But to come back to the question that you asked, I think IT industry, because the nature of digitization, automation, the whole digital change which is happening from physical systems to engineering systems, digital systems, and change of mechanical systems to electronics and electricals and software-driven systems. This change is a must, you know, and it's happening, and you can't stop it. Now, question is, how do you become part of it? And this is where some people may still be hardcore mechanical engineers. No, I have to work with oil and gear and grease, and I want to go into a shop floor. Of course they should. Why not? Because I mean, in the end, you cannot sit on a 0 and 1 and drive to work. You still need to sit on a car, and somebody has to manufacture that car. The car's content of mechanical system proportion to software content may completely change tomorrow. Look at Tesla. I mean, the amount of code written in Tesla versus what was written in, say, Indica was a million times over more number of lines. So car will become a software on wheels, or a hardware on wheels, or a computer on wheels. It's not a mechanical system anymore. So you will be able to contribute that, and you are the translation between what is required in the physical world and in the digital world. So I think it will be required. Now, whether you want to go completely into software coding, you want to work in electromechanical systems, you want to work purely in mechanical systems, is a choice individually you will have to make. As individual, what do you like? What gets you up from bed every morning? you know does it answer your question?
Yes, sir. I think our audience will also get enlightened with this thought, especially the future mechanical engineers. So, moving forward, we know that we have seen that you have come a long way to reach to a position you are today. So, definitely, there must be highs and lows along the journey. So, can you please share how you have kept yourself motivated through the tough times and how you have overcome the hurdle so that we can also get inspired to face the challenges of life?
uh See, ups and downs are part of every life. I mean, even students, you will get, I mean, your highs are the day you get your marks. Some people are on a high, some people are on a low. I mean, that's part and parcel of life. Question is, how do you recover from it? You know, and somewhere I think I'm a bad example, because I consider myself to be a highly self-motivated person. I mean, because in the end, what also happens is, and this is something, we get used to as part of our career, and somewhere this whole thing of reward and recognition starts playing a very important part in our role. So when I'm working and I don't really get recognized, I feel very upset. I'm doing something and I don't get a reward in terms of salary increase at the end of the year, I get very upset. Question is that an indicator of your success? I don't think the answer is always a yes. you know the indicator of success is, did you put your best effort, and did you do justice to the task that was given to you? Now, there are parameters which may have impacted the result. It was not as successful as you want. As long as you don't start cheating yourself, or start fooling yourself, the chances are high that you will always keep striving for improving yourself. And in the end, these things are phases. They're partly the whole idea. How do I bounce back? Because these setups are very temporary. A boss not recognizing your effort, or you not getting a salary increase, or something in a personal life which did not happen. Question is, how do I get about it? What is in my control that I can change? you know and how do I go about it? But one thing I always did was, the day I got up in the morning and say, shit, I have to go to work, I was ready for a job change. Because the day you stop enjoying your work, means, and you don't change, means you're doing injustice to yourself, and you're doing injustice to the company. Because your productivity will get affected, your output will get affected, and then you are punishing two people, yourself and the company both. you know.
It was really inspiring, sir. I hope that everyone will know the things. Now, moving forward to next question, we know that you have worked in two different automobile companies. So, any difference you would like to share?
Yes. So in one way, let me first tell you what are the similarities, and then I can tell you what the differences is. So one is, of course, in every company, and no matter which company you join, the IT company, or international OEM, or an Indian company, which is, in the end, you deal with human beings. And I think one of the biggest factors that you need to master is how to deal with people. And these are people who may be reporting to you, people who may be at your level, your peer group, managers in other departments or whatever, and your bosses. You have to manage all three. Because in the end, everything else can be written in a process. Everything can be templatized. Everything, an algorithm can be written. What you cannot control is human reaction or human behavior. And if you don't do that properly, and I'm saying it in a positive manner, I'm not saying when I say manage relationships, it's not with a negative connotation, it's a positive thing. You know, you have to manage that soft aspect, because that's the most difficult thing to codify, because no human beings, as you know, are similar. So what works for one person will not work for the other person. And especially when you are the junior most in your team, you have to manage your boss's expectations, your boss's how you work with them, how you position yourself with them, and your other colleagues around you. As you grow older, you will take on more responsibility, people will reporting to you, then your responsibility becomes more. you know so in each company, that doesn't change, whether it's a French company like Renault or an Indian company like Tata Motors. What does change is the level of maturity of processes, you know, which comes from how old is the process, what is the learning, how many course corrections have taken place. So is the process very new, or is it already gone through 20 iteration cycles and is reasonably robust and can anticipate the what will work, what will not work, So Renault had a very strong process oriented culture, and it worked in a manner like that. You know, uh, Tata Motors is reasonably new in the automotive industry, especially in passenger vehicles. I mean, Renault is 100 years old in passenger vehicles. Tata Motor, I think, started in '88, if I remember correctly, or '86 when the Indica was launched as the first automotive. The processes there are not very robust, and also, unfortunately, Indians by nature are not very disciplined to documenting the learning. Somewhere we think, and this is one of the challenges you will face. People think knowledge is power, so they tend to hoard knowledge. They don't want to convert it into a standard templatized process which benefits everybody. They feel, no, somebody should come to me and ask, and I will tell them how to work. I will not put it as a knowledge management tool outside which anybody can access so that they don't make mistakes. you know this whole notion of knowledge is power, especially with the whole thing of digitization, internet, everything, is getting dated, but that somehow will take time for people to change. you know and that's where I think somewhere we need to be different. The third element also is the ability to anticipate change. Again, because of maturity of the processes, the exposure that people have, the learning that people have, Renault's processes to anticipate the future were much more robust than Tata Motors it is. And it will take time. Finally, we will be there. Question is, how fast do we learn? But the good part is, Renault had a lot of legacy which they were not wanting to let go. I mean, France is as socialist as India, for example. Maybe even more so. And Renault had a problem because they also had a stake of the government in it. So any decision they take which involved 10 people losing their jobs was a no-no. For example, Tata Motors being a young company has an advantage that we can reinvent ourselves very fast. We have the agility to do. So I think these are the main differences that I could see basically. But I think the in the end, the proof of the pudding is in a market which both are competing, who's succeeding better. Today into the market share, product successes, and all of that, which brings the element of when you're saying who's better, it is in what context. It is a marketplace in India. Globally, Renault is number 14 or 15. We are maybe 23 or 24. So again, what metric are you saying for better has to also be contextualized. But experience-wise, both are phenomenal experiences, but for different reasons.
So now this would be a bit nostalgic question. As you all know, you have been an alumni of NIT Silchar. So could you please share your experience of how was the campus life during that time and how was your journey in NIT Silchar?
No, I think this was for me and my classmates at that time, and the people 2 years, 5 years above and below us. I think were literally the formative years for us, and it had a huge impression on how we saw life or the life skills that we learned. Because one of the things which you may not be exposed to or maybe experiencing, I don't know, was for the level of self dependency that you had on yourself, because you were cut off. I mean, for me to go home, meant a 3 years train journey, 3 days train journey. You know, any letter that there was phones were very poor. You can imagine. So any communication, so our ability to depend on our parents, our relative relationships, relations were very limited. So as a result, we formed a very strong bond amongst our own classmates. Because if somebody felt ill, his parents could not come and look after him. His class fellows and classmates had to look after him or her. So that developed a very strong bond of dependence on each other. Your self-preservation, your ability to manage yourself, you know, and the ability to manage on adverse situations. Because, and I'm sure you must be still having those, which is you have floods in one year and drought on next year, and suddenly whole of Silchar is flooded and you're cut off from the rest of India. I mean, suddenly you don't know whether how will you survive. You don't know whether you'll get food, but you take it in your stride. You say I'll manage. You know, so and that I mean those kind of learnings. I don't think if I had been in a college in the central part of India or in Western Pune or someplace, I would ever have got exposed to or needed to learn. So I think Silchar was phenomenal from that point of view. Our ability to, you know, respond to surprises. I mean, you are walking on the side of the road. I don't know now. Of course, you are in a much more civilized campus. I mean, that time the roads were kacha. There were a lot of pokris or ponds, as we called them that time. And you suddenly see a snake crawling next to you, and you said, "Okay, nice," and you walked on. Because I mean, you never expected that, but you anticipated surprise, and you say it's there, and you coexisted with it. So I think with time these things change, but I'm sure you will have your own experiences which were not there at our time, which are also equally exciting. I mean, the fact that you could walk from Silchar to the college campus in the middle of the night after the night show was an experience by itself, because there were no street lights. You were walking in water half the time because the streets were flooded. I think it was phenomenal for us basically.
It was really nice listening to you because we are those unlucky batches who are not even able to go to our campus. So it was really
Yeah.
nice. Now, last but not the least, I would like to say that can you please give us some advice that how can we excel in our future, especially in this COVID pandemic where like everything is so uncertain.
No, I understand. See, I think you have the what shall I won't say whether no, it's a privilege or the distinction of being faced with a situation like you said, where you have started college and you don't know when you will be able to come to college. You know, but the
And even
reality
we are
you will
not
at some
even
point.
getting the practical knowledges.
Don't worry. In first year, the practical knowledge, I mean, you can always catch on. You will not lose much basically. And out of the people who were there in the batch, I don't know whatever 90 or whatever batch, I don't know how many actually seriously took up that exercises. In the workshop. I mean, a lot of people did it as a tick in the box कि अरे करना है नहीं किया तो problem होगा तो कर दो. And some people really took it with passion that I have to create that, the turning job or the carpentry job, whatever you were supposed to do, you're supposed to do. So don't worry, you will catch up on that. But I'm saying this itself is a surprise which you have to get used to, and saying, okay, what does it mean for me? You know, you are sitting at home, you don't know when it will come, but that's an uncertainty which everybody is facing, and you will at some point overcome that. But as a generation which is growing, I think these uncertainties will become part of life more and more, you know. And this is something you will have to learn to cope with and manage within that and respond. Basically, when I say manage, not close the door and sit down and think, okay, in a depressed mode, okay, I can't do anything about it, but saying, okay, what's the best I can do in this situation? And I think that's will what will give you the strength and the ideas to overcome it. That think of it one as a limitation. It is a limitation, but it's also something which you can not do anything about. So why feel upset about it? And when you do get a chance, I'm sure you'll enjoy it when you come back. When you come to college, you will enjoy it because that's the limited time that you will have. After losing out on the first year there. You know. So I mean, I know it is a bit of gyan, but don't feel too upset about it. See what's the best you can do to manage within the circumstances, because you can't control it anyway. And it's better to be safe than to be sorry afterwards.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I think we are like at the end of the session. So I would like to thank you for being in our show. It was really nice talking to you. And I hope all the audience would also get motivated and inspired by your wise words. So with this, we'd like to thank you and we would like to end the session.
Thank you so much. All the very best. Hope you guys get to college soon and
Yeah.
enjoy the campus life also. Yeah, take care. Bye bye.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Bye.
sir.
Thank you, sir.